Dustin Hopkins from 34. His kick is no good. Wide to the left. Wow.
That was the last time Washington played a game in London. Dustin Hopkins, as Kenny Albert called. Man, we've heard a lot of Kenny Albert recently. Called all the hockey games. He's so good. Hopkins missed a 31-yard field goal in overtime. And the Redskins tied the Bengals 27-27 in a game that really felt like a loss. They are going back to London next season. It's official. Good morning, everybody. Ben Standig will join us in about 30 minutes from Indianapolis. Key players that Washington may be interested in the April draft will be taking the podium today. Yesterday, it was Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. We'll play some of that sound for you today on the show. So the NFL announced this morning that Washington will host one of the 3 international games in London in 2026. We knew from Nikki Jabala's reporting about 2 months ago that they would be chosen to host an international game. And as the announcements of international games have been coming out over the last 3 weeks or so, we narrowed it down to one of the 3 London games yesterday for the most part. I mean, there was a shot, I guess, in a couple of other spots, but it was likely going to be in London. And yes, they will host a game at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, not Wembley, where they played that game in 2016. No official date for the game, but the London games have been consistently over the years during the month of October. There's a game here or there that was played in late September or early November, but the vast majority of NFL games in London have been played during the month of October. I would expect that to be the case for Washington. Again, this will be a home game for Washington. That means instead of 9 home games, which many NFC teams will have next year, Washington will have just 8 in Landover. It's the first time they will host an international game. The other 2, Cincinnati in 2016, they were the road team. And last year in Madrid against the Dolphins, they were the road team. So who will they play? Well, you go to their home games and you look at Dallas, the Giants, and the Eagles. Well, Dallas is already playing an international game, so I would strike them off the list. You don't typically see a lot of divisional matchups in these international games, so I would probably discount the Giants and the Eagles. And then among the other 6 scheduled home games, Seattle, the Rams, Texans, Colts, Bengals, and Falcons, the Rams are already playing in an international game. They're playing in Melbourne against San Francisco. So it's possible they could still be the opponent, but I'll knock them off the list. And now it comes down to Seattle, Houston, Indy, Cincinnati, and Atlanta. And Atlanta played last year in an international game. So I have a feeling it's not going to be Atlanta next year. So it comes down to, I think, Seattle, Houston, Indy, Cincinnati. And actually, Indy played an international game last year. They played the Falcons. So we can cross Indy off. I think we're doing some deductive reasoning here, and it's Seattle, it's Houston, or it's Cincinnati. That's my guess. Seattle, Houston, or Cincinnati in the matchup against Washington, Tottenham Hotspur sometime in October. Got it? Max, did you follow that process? It could be the Giants and the Eagles. I'd like to go back and see how many, like last year, the games in London, in Europe anyway, Minnesota, Cleveland, Denver, Jets, Rams, Jags. Okay, the Jags are hosting a game at Wembley. They may also host 2 games. We'll see. The year before that, Jets, Vikings, Jags, Bears, Patriots, Jags. I mean, you got a lot of, AFC, NFC in there. I mean, the last divisional matchup in London, I'm going back through the list. I mean, I can't find one. I'm back to 2019 already. And here's one. Carolina, Tampa, actually, October 13th, Tottenham Hotspur, October 13th, 2019. Was a divisional matchup between the Panthers and the Buccaneers. Teams don't like to have their big divisional matchups at home have one of those games played internationally. I would guess, again, that it would be between Cincinnati, Houston, and Seattle. Those are the three teams on my short list of who they'll play. I don't mind this at all. I actually kind of like it. The London games are the 9:30 a.m. games. We got that at Madrid as well. The idea that they're losing a home game. Look, I mean, it's gotten better in terms of the home field advantage. It's not one of the worst in the league, but I don't think giving up a home game is a big deal. This is a chance for Washington to be on, once again, a solo, game stage. I kind of like it. I'm not that upset about losing a home game. Every team's going to have to deal with this, and they'll make it competitively fair, and they've been trying to make it competitively fair. But, in thinking about, and I asked Max to pull the last time they played in London, Washington actually played one of the very first games internationally in the UK. It was a preseason game against the 49ers. Back in the 90s. That was one of the first ever games, but that was preseason. Of course, the Redskins played the 49ers in Osaka as well in 2002. The famous Steve Spurrier, this thing's kind of easy. He didn't realize that the 49ers were playing players that weren't going to actually play for them once the regular season began. Truly one of the funniest things ever, the Osaka game. Because Spurrier was convinced fun and gun works. I mean, they're throwing it all over the park, 300 and something yards passing for Danny Werfel and company. And then they played San Francisco in week 3 of the regular season. And Spurrier, after losing that game 20-10 and not generating much offense, said they played the game much differently than they played us the last time. Well, yeah, and they also had totally different players on the field. The 2016 game at Wembley, that was an unbelievable football game. Do you guys remember this game? It was a game that went so long, it bled into the 1 o'clock starts. So it was a 9:30 a.m. start, and it ended at like 1:15. So the 1 o'clock games had all started when Washington and Cincinnati finally came to an end. Late in overtime, they played the full overtime, and it was a tie, 27-27. Back then, the overtimes were still 15 minutes, not 10 minutes. Washington, I'll never forget coming in the next day and saying, really tough loss, because it felt like a loss. Washington in that game against Cincinnati had 546 yards of offense. Kirk threw for 458. 458. 2 touchdowns. They rushed for yards in that game. Big fat Rob Kelly had 87 yards rushing. I mean, you had Crowder at 9 catches for 107 yards, Jordan Reed 9 for 99, Vernon Davis 5 for 93, Pierre 6 for 67, Deshaun 3 for 48, Chris Thompson caught 5 balls, Ryan Grant caught a ball. I mean, they were throwing the ball all over the park. Cincinnati was moving the ball. Washington's defense was terrible, remember, in 2016. They had 415 yards. The two teams combined for 961 yards. And, of course, 54 points and 65 first downs. The Bengals had 35 first downs in the game. Washington had 30. Why did Washington lose the game? Penalties, 15 of them in the game for over 100 yards. They did have 1 turnover as well. But that game was painful and ultimately was very costly. Washington had that stretch in 2016. They were really, that's the best. 2024 is the best offensive team that Washington's had since that 2016 team. That 2016 team finished basically top 2 to 3 in every statistical category that meant something offensively, but they were horrendous on defense. And if you recall, Dustin Hopkins didn't just miss that kick to win that game. He missed a kick the week before in Detroit that would have been helpful. Missed 2 kicks in the Thanksgiving Day game against the Cowboys that they were in. It was a year that, of course, ended with the thud against the Giants on New Year's Day when the Giants had nothing to play for and all Washington had to do was win to clinch a playoff spot. They had plenty of opportunities to do it before they got to that season finale. That would have been the first time Washington had gone back-to-back playoff seasons since 91, 92. But they didn't get there, and they tried to back it up this year, and they weren't able to do that. It would be nice to see back-to-back playoff seasons. Think about that. I mean, 33 years last year since a title game in the NFC, but it's also been now we're going on 34 years since back-to-back playoff seasons, and it'll be 35 because this year, even if they go to the playoffs in 26, it won't be back-to-back. That is pretty bad that you don't have over a 35-year period at least 2 seasons back-to-back making the playoffs. But that Cincinnati game was during a stretch where they were just unstoppable offensively. They came back, they beat the Vikings, put up 400 yards, 400 plus against the Packers and 42 points, 500 plus yards against the Cowboys and 26 points. They just kept scoring all season long. They just couldn't get any stops on that 2016 team. I bring up that 2016 team periodically because it was so good offensively, and many of you think, well, you're just using it as an excuse to give us some Kirk Cousins stats. That may be partially true, but it's also to really illustrate the skill position players that team had. They have not had skill position players like that since. I mean, Pierre, Deshaun, Crowder, Jordan Reed. I mean, I had Kirk on the show a week and a half ago. He says Jordan Reed's a Hall of Famer if he doesn't have all those injuries. And I think we've discussed this before. After Sean Taylor, he's probably the greatest what if in franchise history. Jamison Crowder, Chris Thompson, Vernon Davis. This team right now needs some of that stuff on offense. Big time. Anyway, Washington officially hosting a game at Tottenham Hotspur. It'll probably be sometime in October. And again, I would suggest that it's going to be Cincinnati, Houston, or Seattle. Best guess. All right. I do want to talk about a couple of things related to what the two coaches said, the coach and the general manager said yesterday. And specifically, I want to talk about Zach Ertz, and we will do that when we come back. Ben Standing will join us at 10:35.
featuring Ben in the ways, that he can do his things. It's in the backfield. It's, through to compare him to Zach. They're way different skill sets, so I know they're both playing tight end, but, they're featured differently in that way. And so what I do know is him on the move, and whether it's the run game, pass game, running away from people, maybe not finding the zone and stopping, those are differences. And I'm looking forward to seeing that this year.
Dan Quinn yesterday talking about Ben Sinnott, who I just want to remind everybody, Adam Peters compared to fullback Kyle Juszczyk after the draft, April 2024. Think about that. Ben Sinnott, the general manager, compared him to a fullback, Kyle Juszczyk, in San Francisco when they drafted him. It's not the position he's played, obviously. Cliff Kingsbury's attack did not have a fullback. Makes me wonder, and it makes sense what Dan Quinn said, because they do have different skill sets, but it's not like we know that so obviously because Sinnott hasn't played enough. But the idea of more under center, more run game married to play action, pass, and bootleg, more sort of 12 personnel at times with, say, Sinnott and Bates on the field, both of whom can block and catch passes. And now Sinnott may not be a fullback in the backfield with, let's just say, Krosky Merritt, but he might be. He might be in Blau's system, but he certainly feels like that first level on the bootleg. Here comes Jaden after a fake to Krosky Merritt. He's coming back on the boot, and there is Sinnott after he blocked, and then he's in that first shallow level area for a catch. More Kyle Juszczyk is what Adam Peters said when they drafted Ben Sinnott. It's not the way we've seen him used, because we haven't seen him used that much, period. But it's not the way Kingsbury was going to use him. Maybe it's the way Ben Johnson is going to use him. So yesterday, Adam Peters, after the podium, which we played during the show yesterday, he was asked about Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, it was reported on yesterday by Tom Pelissaro, wants to come back and play again. Wants to come back and play and believes he'll be ready to play week 1 after his torn ACL in week 15 against Minnesota on the road. And I said on the show yesterday, look, I think Zach Ertz, if he's, truly going to be healthy and he's going to be able to play at the same level, I'd welcome him back. I would. But I do have some conditions on that. Peter said about Zach Ertz, I think starting with Zach, it's really hard to quantify how good he is. I think his ability to get open and to be a great target on third down on any passing down makes him a QB-friendly player who earns the confidence of whatever QB he's playing with. You can't really see a 40 time or anything like that. He's just always open. He makes big plays, and he's an incredible guy in the locker room. So that was a big loss when he went down. We'll keep the door open for him for sure. We've had a lot of talks with him personally and his agent, just keeping that door open, seeing how he progresses with his injury, but you can't count on anything, right? So we have 4 guys under contract right now, and we'll look to fill his role with a combination of those guys. But still, we have some guys who we really have a lot of confidence in. John Bates has another level to go to as a pass catcher. Ben, as in Ben Sinnott, is going to have a really good opportunity in this offense to show his versatility. Colson, as in Colson Yankoff, a really athletic guy helping the passing game. And Lawrence Cager, I liked him in the preseason last year. We didn't see him much in the regular season. And Lawrence, we're really excited about his ability to help in the passing game. So with that group, we feel really good, but we wouldn't be opposed to having another. So when I had Dan Quinn on the show 2 weeks ago, I asked him a question at the very end of our conversation about, looking ahead. And, I said, I think I included the question in here, right? Did I include the question, Max, when I sent this to you? Okay, so we don't have it to play right now?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll just say what Dan Quinn said. So Dan Quinn said to me when I asked him the following question, I said, if you were granted a wish to add one player, you don't have to name a name because he wasn't going to do that, but name the position that this one player would fill on your roster. And he said, he didn't give one position. He said, we need a player from a pass rush standpoint that can really impact a game. We need that from a coverage standpoint as well. And then he said, we need an offensive player that can score from wherever he is on the field. I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially it. And that's where I get into the Zach Ertz thing and my conditions for this. Not that anybody cares about our conditions for bringing a player back. I like Zach Ertz, and if Zach Ertz can be Zach Ertz of the last 2 years, there's a place for him on this team. But Washington has to, clearly get younger, faster, more athletic on both sides of the ball, starting with defense. Then we can talk about offense. Because I think if they went into next season with what they have on offense, bringing a couple of their own players back and maybe adding one additional skill position player, I'd still feel like offensively they've got a shot to be pretty good because of Jaden Daniels more than anything else. Defense is still the priority. They can't be that bad defensively for a third straight year and have us believe that they're going to have a successful season. I mean, they may have a successful season. You're still in good shape if you've got great offense, but with terrible defense, you really can't you can't go very far with it. You can't compete late into January, even though they did it 2 years ago. It was an aberration. It really was on so many levels. And it was so, dominated and tied to a brilliant quarterback performance. But I need somebody in addition to Zach Ertz. I need somebody who can score. I need somebody who's a legit threat. I need speed. I need athleticism. I was not a big fan of the Kyle Pitts idea just because I followed the situation in Atlanta. They tagged him anyway. And there was a lot of question marks around Kyle Pitts, his effort, his preparation, his ability to be more versatile as a blocker in addition to a pass catcher. Now he really came on at the end of this year, and maybe there is that's the beginning of this maturation process, and he's going to become what everybody thought he was going to become when he got drafted, in the top 5 out of Florida a few years back. And I look at, some of the other guys, Cade Otton, Isaiah Likely, Chiga Quanquo from Tennessee, former Maryland player. I like him a lot. A guy like Likely is a real threat as a pass-catching tight end. He's younger, too. I think Washington still got to look for, if they bring Ertz back and they don't add another tight end, then they better add another running back or they better add another receiver. They need more playmaking ability. They need, as Quinn told me, 2 weeks ago, they need a guy that can score from anywhere on the field. That's exactly what he said. And the only player they have on the field right now that can do that is their quarterback. Terry's a guy that can score from anywhere on the field, I guess, to a certain degree, but he's not a strike fear into the defense player. They need one of those. They really do. Now, maybe Krosky Merritt ends up becoming that home run threat. We saw it on Christmas Day. That was the first one he really, took to that second and third level, and then they were chasing. And it was a 70-something yard touchdown run against the Cowboys. Maybe he ends up becoming that in year 2. I don't know. Maybe. But I like Zach Ertz. I think he's a security blanket. You mentioned this to me yesterday, I think, Max, or somebody did. Just going through his career and his stats, he is probably going to go to the Hall of Fame, isn't he?
He's got the counting numbers, honestly. Let me pull them up.
Zach Ertz has 825 career catches, 57 touchdowns, 8,592 yards. compare that just to the last tight end that made the Hall of Fame. Who is that? Maybe Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates. Zach Ertz has had a really productive career. And I think he's actually, I need to look at sort of the Hall of Fame monitor on this position more clear.
So
more
you want
closely.
me to give the number right now for Pro Football Reference Hall of Fame monitor number? Because I'm looking at
give
it.
it to me.
So he's 25th among tight ends. The average Hall of Fame tight end is a 99.08. Zach Ertz currently sits at 43.64.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so way off.
Way off. Interesting. I mean, somebody sent me the numbers yesterday. I'm like, wow. I mean, I knew, it's not like we didn't know he was a great player in Philadelphia. Yeah, he was. And, big time clutch player in Philadelphia. But he wants to come back for a 14th NFL season at the age of 36 years old. And look, here's the one thing you can't do. You can't, say we're going to count on Ertz to be Zach Ertz. You can't have an off season where you're passing on potential replacement options that are younger, faster, even more athletic. We think he will be ready by week 1. I don't think you can do that unless you add the dynamic wide receiver, unless you add Alec Pierce, unless you add something in free agency that's really exciting from a speed and playmaking ability at the wide receiver position. If you do that, then maybe we can talk a little bit more about bringing Zach Ertz back and hoping he's your number 1 pass catching tight end. But if you're not going to do that in other spots offensively, that's not the way to go. And I like Zach Ertz. I don't love his blocking or even lack of interest at times in blocking. But for Jaden Daniels in particular, and he was this for Marcus Mariota too, he really is that, that proverbial cliched, safety blanket as a 6'6", 250-pound tight end who just is a very high-level route runner. And as Adam Peters said, is always open. And open when it matters. There's something to be said for that. But I think ultimately I need more speed. I need more playmaking ability. They have it at quarterback. They have a very good wide receiver in Terry McLaurin. They just need another piece. And maybe they see Krosky Merritt as the home run hitter. Maybe they see, an opportunity for somebody else that we're not thinking about. I mean, he was very complimentary of Cager. I mean, these are guys, you don't know enough about them, and they come out of nowhere all the time and end up being like, who was that guy? Who's that guy that just caught 78 passes, for 900 yards and 10 touchdowns? I actually really liked that guy in the preseason. Cager. He was the guy that, didn't he wear 89 in the preseason, I think? He was an interesting player, I thought, and looked like a natural pass-catching tight end. But again, on Ertz, yes, I'd welcome him back. Yes, I think it would be a great thing to have him starting in week 1. But no, you can't count on that as your, off-season playmaker move to bring him back. You've got to add to that. Ben Standig is in Indianapolis. He'll join us next. All right, Ben's joining us an extra day this week. He'll be back with us on Friday, but since he's in Indianapolis and it is the week of the Indy Combine, he is with us today. He was at both the Adam Peters and Dan Quinn press conferences, and he'll be busy today, I think, with players taking the podium, some of whom may be Washington's selection at number 7. But let's start with Peters and Quinn. What stood out to you?
A little bit of
Ben.
Can you hear me?
I got you now.
Okay. Obviously there was some news, at least subtle news, no official decision made yet on Marshall Lattimore. I find that hard to believe, but okay, cool. The Zach Ertz part, maybe he comes back. They're leaving the door open. Zach Ertz apparently saying he wants to keep playing. Good for him. I just don't quite know how that fits into where this team is, not to mention we don't even have any idea when he'll be back. But by and large, look, I think they're pretty good both at saying things without saying anything. That's largely what I sort of took at it. I'm curious your interpretation, but they're moving forward. No panic. There was some recognition that obviously what happened last year didn't work. Peter seemed to acknowledge lessons learned in the McLaurin negotiation that hopefully pays off positively here with the Tunsil situation, which is ongoing. So, I don't know there was any screaming headlines or anything, but, there's always some interesting details to parse out.
By the way, just on, he's been asked about the Terry situation as it relates to the Tunsil extension contract talks. First of all, I think these are apples and oranges situations in terms of the player they're trying to extend. That's number one. But number two is, what do you think he really feels genuinely deep down he learned from it?
Well, it's a good question. Obviously, it went on far too long, much longer than any of us imagined. I presume much longer than he imagined. I think the way to know that something is different or that he has learned a lesson is sort of kind of what you're inferring, that, with Terry McLaurin, obviously a player they like, a player they want, but it's not a player that he acquired. Laramie Tunsil, he made that trade. He said, hey, we're going to send a bunch of picks. We're going to get this guy. You don't let that guy potentially hold out 1 year later, right? You knew what you were getting yourself into in terms of where Tunsil was with his deal. So to me, the lesson learned would be, hey, maybe we don't have to win the negotiation, but we got to get it done. And so we'll see how that plays out here.
Yeah, I don't think that there is I don't think he would publicly ever say, what do you want me to learn from it? We offered him a really fair deal and they wanted, top of the market money and length and et cetera. And we were never going to offer that. And eventually they came around and came to their senses about what was realistic and fair based on his age and based on the situation, et cetera. But I don't think, that's really what he would ever say. He wouldn't say, I didn't learn anything from it. What I learned is he had an agent that was unrealistic, and they finally got realistic at the end. I think this Tunsil thing, just from a perception standpoint, not that it would really impact the season if he missed some OTA days or missed minicamp, but it definitely has to be done by training camp, no later. You can't enter training camp with the possibility of another holdout, hold-in situation.
Yeah, in my head, this needs to get done before free agency starts. Not that it has to. He does have a year left. There's no technical rush, but just to have know what your costs are. Make it lower his cap number to get even more space for now. Figure out exactly, hey, we just gave him the most money than any tackle has ever given him. He's already fifth in average with what his current deal anyway. So it's not like it's not like offensively some huge jump, but whatever it is, they need to know what the plan is. And I think that's, to me, that's got to happen way sooner. And also, even in terms of missing some stuff, Tunsil missed or sat out, whatever, plenty of the voluntary stuff and even, camp days because they were resting him. And clearly, I think it was fine. So he's not, him missing practices is already baked in a little bit. But yes, this needs to get done from a mental standpoint.
Talking to Ben Standig at Ben Standig on X. Ben writes on Substack. You should subscribe and follow his reporting. He does a great job reporting on the team. and he has a podcast called Last Man Standing. I want to get to your latest reveal of the player survey you did, but there were a couple of things. You actually reported 3 weeks ago or so, that Deron Payne would be back in 2026, but without anything done to his contract. And that was confirmed yesterday by Adam Peters. So they're going to go with Deron Payne that final year. It'll be a true contract year for him. He'll count $28+ million on the salary cap. So we know that piece is done. I'm interested in the Ertz comments, and some of those comments he made, off the podium in one-on-ones where, he talked about, respecting Ertz, and Ertz was a big deal, and Ertz, is somebody that they'd welcome back, but not everything's guaranteed. What would be your guess today on whether or not Zach Ertz will be re-signed by Washington and in a Washington uniform early next season?
I find that, I don't know about percentage or anything, but I find that hard to believe. I mean, first off, just at a base level, right? He gets hurt in week 14, was that early December?
Yep.
So if we'll go with the 9 to 12 months rehab time, let's just say 10 months. For argument's sake, that means what, October? And that's just to start kind of going again, to a degree. So that's a long ways off. They can't wait for that. Not to mention, and again, no disrespect to Zach Ertz, he obviously has been, in my view, certainly outperformed any realistic expectations during his time here. But, sort of like with Bobby Wagner, there's limitations with his athleticism at this point. No really yards after the catch. They need to go younger, as they do in a lot of spots across the team. Now, if you tell me there's a world where they're like, hey, we're going to sign you, we're going to rehab you, and then we'll see where you are down the line, but we're going to make moves otherwise, sure. I mean, I could live with that, right? I mean, having him in the building certainly doesn't seem like the worst idea. So that's all good. But, whether it's going with Ben Sinnott or signing somebody else, they have to move forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of the interesting comments that Quinn made about Ben Sinnott is that the skill set with Zach Ertz is completely different. And I went back and found the quote that I barely remembered, but Adam Peters compared Ben Sinnott to Kyle Juszczyk when they drafted him. But they didn't have a fullback in their offense with Kingsbury. And, the Blau system will be more, amenable to a fullback or a tight end that both blocks and catches, with a quarterback under center and a run game and the bootleg and the play action off of it. And I think maybe they see Ben Sinnott as a much better fit for the David Blau system. Do you agree with that? Is that what we heard from Quinn?
Yeah, that was my question, and I basically framed it as, is he a better fit here? And, if you look at, when Kingsbury was out, and it was this notion of tension between Kingsbury and Peters. Again, I don't really know that was, I think that was a bit overstated. But
yeah,
if you did have to sort of distill it to a player, I think Ben Sinnott to me was that guy. You mentioned that Juszczyk quote. I definitely remember that. Have referenced it many times. He referenced Juszczyk and Kyle and George Kittle. And the first thing when he said Juszczyk, I'm like, how is that going to work in this setup? And obviously it didn't, because even after Ertz got hurt, it's not like Ben Sinnott suddenly started getting 5-6 targets a game. It is just a very different player. And maybe this was an example where Peters liked the guy and it just didn't quite mesh with what they were doing. But I do think there's a lot there. He's athletic. He's got good hands. And obviously, look, they liked him for a reason. Now, most people I've talked to around the league thought he was overdrafted. That's neither here nor there at this point. But if Peters saw something in him, now would be the time for the rest of us to see it. And I do think the system with Blau is a better fit for sure.
Yeah. I think that they have a lot of positions that are interesting because they have so many holes to fill. They have so many roster spots to fill with all of their, unrestricteds and restricteds, et cetera. We've talked a lot about that over the last few weeks or since the season ended. But tight end is going to be interesting because there are some options in free agency. There's also a big-time option in the draft. I don't think that particular player from Oregon goes at number 7 overall. Where did you have the Oregon tight end going in your mock? Do you remember?
Kenyon Sadiq. Yeah,
Sadiq.
I want to say maybe, I don't know if it was Tampa at 15, but it was in that sort of 15 to 20 range. And, he's the kind of guy that, the combine could be something that lifts him up. He's already, Bruce Feldman, the Athletic and Fox Sports put that to the annual freaks list, guys who are just
he's a freak.
athletically crazy. And I had Bruce on my podcast the other day to discuss it. And Sadiq was a guy that we did discuss, both because, like you said, maybe Washington could use him, but also, as this one of these guys that can just, blow minds with what he's able to do. We'll see if he's able to do that. But there's some, if they really do want a tight end on round 3, there could be some guys there based on the boards. But, again, I think we've talked about this earlier on a little bit with, say, like the running back room as well. They are not going to realistically be able to fill all these holes. So the guys probably make some calls like, okay, here's what we have already. Are we good with this if we have to? And I think tight end is one of those positions if they think Ben Sinnott is ready to go. I also think that John Bates can be more as a pass catcher. He showed that, I think, during the Rivera times and not so much the last 2 years. But, again, showing more is not the same as being, Travis Kelce. I'm not saying that. But, both have to decide if they think they have enough.
Yeah, I mean, he even mentioned the guy that I thought was really impressive in preseason for what it's worth, and that was 89, Cager, as a possibility. And he definitely looks the part more as a pass-catching tight end, or at least when they had him in some of those preseason games, he looked that part and looked pretty impressive. See, that's the thing about, especially when you change a significant part of your coaching staff with new coordinators on both sides of the football, and you're changing the way you play football. These coaches have a sense, along with Adam Peters, on whether or not they have players that are talented enough to make a big leap in the system that they're about to employ versus the one that they just came from. And I think it's interesting to kind of figure out who those players are. And I think based on the comment that we heard from Dan Quinn, I think Sinnott's one of those guys, don't you? I think Sinnott's one of those guys that they think actually has a chance to make a huge jump in his third year.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I think that he's a guy. I mean, the guy drafted him in the second round, so obviously that, again, the athleticism is there. When I did my survey about the best athlete on the roster, he, slightly nominating himself, pointed out that, being able to play multiple sports is a big deal. He played 6 varsity sports his last year of high school. So, he can do
6 varsity sports his last year in high school?
Yeah.
How do you play 6 varsity sports? There are typically only 3 seasons.
I didn't ask what his GPA was. I don't know.
How are you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an average of 2 sports per season. I mean, I guess you could be playing, in the spring, you could be, high jumping and maybe playing baseball. I don't know. Maybe that's interesting. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, no. Like I said, I mean, look, I think, whether it's Sinnott, whether it's Jordan McGee, Johnny Newton to a degree, all these guys were kind of blocked by veterans, and therefore we didn't get to see their full deal. We're sort of left wondering what exactly are they.
Yeah.
And I think those are 3 guys that, can be huge factors. I mean, look, we talked about Deron Payne. If Johnny Newton has shown more, maybe Deron Payne isn't back. I know there are different types of players, but just in terms of like that position. But not only are they different types of players, but we just didn't see enough, right?
Right.
I mean, the question of why Bobby Wagner, is he coming back or not, is we didn't see Jordan McGee play the position that we would think he would play if Wagner is gone and so on. So, that's the other part of this whole mystery. It's not just the new schemes. It's like we have to project, as do they to an extent, what these guys will do, because we just haven't seen it enough.
All right, let's finish up with, you surveyed 29 players at the end of the season, best athlete, the guy that everybody would vote for Pro Bowl. Tunsil was that. The best athlete was Tyler Owens. And then you had essentially a question about the 2025 downfall of the season. What did you learn from that survey?
Yeah, you hear talk of, hey, this locker room isn't fractured. Nobody, quit on Quinn. And to a man, that was the message that I got, that there was no issue in that regard, and that Quinn, the culture he set has been really good. That said, there was some talk of slippage in certain ways, maybe not having, being as cohesive as they were the year before, maybe not everybody attacking the offseason the way you would like. And I would just say anecdotally from the outside, I remember when Quinn first arrived, we started talking to these guys, particularly the ones who we knew already, the McLaurins and John Allens and so on. There definitely seemed to be some more pep in their step when they were talking about the world. And obviously they were as miserable, if not more so, than the rest of us were dealing with all the losing. And again, I'm not saying that wasn't the case this year, but we know McLaurin had the holdout that put a pale over the whole situation, in that regard. And so I think there was, a little bit of carryover from that. But, again, I don't think these guys think it's miles away. But at the same time, there were some sharper comments about, we need to be more focused on doing the little things. And in the way I was talking with him, I didn't take it as the cliched response. Because not everybody said the exact same things, but I took it as, true belief from a lot of these guys that, hey, we just were not on our mark as much as possible.
All right. What's today? Player interviews, players taking podium.
Yeah, Ruben Bain and David Bailey, two of the pass rushers we'll be talking about the next 2 months, are about to go in a few moments here. And tomorrow it'll be Caleb Downs. Sonny Styles went earlier today. So, yes, we get players today. All the defensive guys will have gone through by tomorrow. Tight ends are also coming through tomorrow.
Kuiper had the Skins taking Sonny Styles at 7 in his latest mock yesterday. This is a guy that people really are impressed with and think that in some ways he'll end up being a better pro as he continues to physically develop than he was a college player at Ohio State.
It's so funny that the players, the edge rushers aside, that the players that seem to be there are all at non-premium positions, linebacker, safety, running back, and that, this may be a year old if Washington goes down that route where they just have to say, all right, they can't focus on so-called positional value. They have to focus on, essentially BPA. You can do BPA when you need everything. It works a little bit easier that way.
I was thinking about something, and I'll just end with this, and that is that the moves they make in free agency will be tells about, how they view the draft, right? I mean, if they end up going out and signing, as an example, a Pierce or a running back, in free agency, then Jeremiah Love and Carnell Tate are likely off the board. But on defense, I don't know that they can sign any player in free agency that would eliminate any of the defensive possibilities because they need so much.
100%. I don't, and maybe you would say if they took pure Mike signed a pure Mike linebacker, maybe that takes Sonny Styles out of the equation, or if they somehow upgrade at safety, maybe that means no more Caleb Downs. But in general, 100%. In terms of all three levels, add more. And that's my one thing. Even if I think that maybe there's a world where they should just add more around Jaden and just try to build up, raise the floor on defense, I almost want them at 7 to take one of these defenders, because as we've discussed, it's not just you need difference makers at some point. You need somebody that the other team has to look at and say,
yeah,
we need to shift things that way. And that's not happening. And that doesn't just happen by raising the floor. That happens by adding what you think is premium talent, and that's going to come at 7. So as much as I'm sort of still thinking about Jaden building around the offense up more, I think at 7th pick, it would be cool to add that kind of player for the defense.
Agreed. All right. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Of course, man. See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody. Yeah, I mean, we're going to start, getting big time clues as to what they think about the draft. But I don't think the clues will come defensively. I think the clues will be offensively. We can eliminate players offensively from this draft based on what they do in free agency. I think it'll be a hard time eliminating defensive players from their possible pick at number 7. I'm specifically talking about number 7. Based on what they do in free agency, because they just need so much. Yes, I guess if they went out and signed a safety or 2, maybe Caleb Downs isn't going to be the guy. But other than that, you need 2 or 3 of everything. And they don't even have 1 of most things on defense. So, yeah. I want to talk about Daron Payne a little bit. We will do that when we come back. Also, we'll play for you some of the Adam Peters and Dan Quinn sound from yesterday. And again, yes, some of the key potential number 7 first-round picks are going to speak today. You heard him say that Bailey and Bain are these are not nearly as important as the 15 minutes that the teams get with these players. People will tell you in these organizations, yeah, measurements are important. 40 times okay, shuttles okay, but really the value of Indy comes in that sit down, face to face with a player for the first time. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
I think the versatility will help in some of that, Nikki. What's so much fun about coaching Duran, he's big enough to be a 3-4 end. You guys saw some of that here early on. He's got the strength that can play inside at nose tackle and quickness to move. So to see JK and he and Johnny, and how do we feature them on the field together some, having the three of those together, that excites me, honestly. These are guys that really love to battle and compete. And so because they're versatile, it gives Durante even more options of, how to deploy and how to match up guys. So it's a big deal for us.
Dan Quinn talking about Daron Payne with the media yesterday. Durante Jones last year as a part of Brian Flores' defensive staff, they played a base 3-4 defense, and they played their base defense more than anybody did in the NFL. So they were in base a significant percentage of the time, meaning that even though, you typically don't see a lot of base defense in the NFL, you see a lot of sub packages become the majority. Those sub packages include, typically an extra defensive back, sometimes two extra defensive backs, nickel or dime. But obviously they kind of feel like Duran's got a chance to be, and I would say, a 3-4 defensive end. Now, the 3-4 defensive ends last year for Minnesota were, guys like Jonathan Allen. Jonathan Allen, remember, Minnesota traded for and ultimately did not have a great season. So they must think more of Daron Payne's talent to be a 3-4 defensive end than they saw in Jonathan Allen. They had a very good nose tackle in Javon Hargrave. They had very good, linebackers in Grenard and Eric Wilson and Van Ginkel. They had good secondary players in Isaiah Rodgers and Metellus and Harrison Smith, who had been around for a long period of time. They weren't the most talented defense overall, but they ended up being one of the best defenses in the NFL, playing in a lot of base. So I think there are a couple of things with Duran. Before I get to those, let me let you hear what Adam Peters said about Daron Payne when asked about him yesterday.
We haven't begun that, and I don't think we're going to explore that at this time. Really excited to have Duran with us next year, and we can probably address that at a later time, maybe after the year. But and I've talked with his agent about that. What I can say is I got a ton of respect for Duran. His toughness, his physicality, his leadership, his ability to play and be available all the time. And there's nobody tougher than him. And I think he's going to really have a chance to flourish in this new defense, where we'll be a little bit more multiple and allow him to move around a little bit. But right now, I think Laramie at this point is the only one we're talking to.
That was a question about Duran and the idea of extending him with 1 year left on his deal. Something about Daron Payne. I've always been a big fan of Daron Payne. I've always felt like, wow, he is so talented. And during a game, it'll flash, once or twice. And in the season of 2022, it more than flashed. He had a dominant season. He was one of the best 5 defensive tackles in football in 2022. He just was, and it was a contract year. That was the outlier, though. Statistically, for sure, 2022 was a completely different season than any other he's played in the NFL. He had 11 and a half sacks. His next best was his rookie year when he had 5. He had 3 sacks last year. He was an absolute force in 2022, and he got the big contract. And I think, at that point, given his age, which was 24 years old, it made sense. Pay the man. He proved it. Some of you at the time, and I think you were proven right, said, red flag, Kevin, red flag. He did it in a contract year. His 5th season in the league, it took him to become a dominant, interior defensive tackle. But he did it because he was up for a contract. And look, the 3 seasons since, he hasn't been very good. Hasn't been on very good defensive football teams either. Peters talked about his leadership. The one thing that is 100% true about Duran, he is available. He doesn't miss games. I mean, I think he missed one last year, but I think he went 4 or 5 straight years without missing a regular season football game, and he's played hurt before. He has been, forget the edge players that they had with Sweat and Chase Young. Interior-wise, he has been their most gifted player with the biggest upside by far. But we've now seen, 8 seasons of Daron Payne, and we know what he is. He's gifted, but he's wildly inconsistent. Steve Suter, who did film breakdown for me this year and was excellent doing it, I don't think there was a player that drove Suter nuts more than Daron Payne. And he would point it out, week in and week out. Look at 94. Look at 94 in this play. How do they look at the film and not absolutely rip him for the effort on this play? And he'd pick 2 or 3 plays out from every game where it just looked like he allowed himself to be taken out of the play completely, gave up on plays. And then the next week it was like, that was one hell of a play by 94. I'd like to see that more often. And I think that's what we've said about him. It's like, God, if you could just give us your best every single play, every single week, you've got a chance to be one of the 10 best in the league at that position. I am interested to see. Daron is freakish athletically. I don't think that athleticism gets enough due with him. He is, his peers would tell you he is a freak athletically at 6'3", 320. He can really move when he wants to. We've seen him be a dominant force as an interior pass rusher. We've seen that. We've seen, by the way, last year is a weird year, too, because of all the injuries. He and Kinlaw both ended up playing out of position a lot. Now, I don't know what a 3-4 defensive end looks like on Daron. I don't know if it looks like a Leonard Williams. I don't. I'd like to think that maybe it could. Maybe he'll excel, as a pass rusher, as a guy that can take up some blockers in the run game and allow the 4 backers behind him to make plays. But Daron's athleticism is freakish. It's just not always on display. Do we get it 28 years old? He's going to turn 29 before the season starts. That should still be prime years for Daron Payne, even though it'll be his 9th season in the NFL. Do we get a 2022 repeat? That's what they're counting on. Because I think there's an aspect to the sticking with Daron Payne at a $28 million salary cap hit for one more season and not worrying about what happens if he has a great season. I think what it comes down to is this. You can't trade Daron Payne right now. There's not a market for Daron Payne right now, trade-wise, because you'd have to make the decision if you traded for him to, either eat the big contract next year for 1 year or extend him. And there isn't anything he's done in the last 2 or 3 years that screams extension. And I think because he's not a tradable player right now, that's my belief. I think what they're saying here is we don't want to watch him walk and get nothing. And if they released him, they'd get nothing. If he plays out next year and they lose him after 2026, they'll get a comp pick based on what they'd end up doing in free agency and what he gets as a free agent. They'll at least get a comp pick for him. You release him now, you get the massive cap savings, but you don't get anything in return for him. I believe that if there had been a legitimate trade market for Daron, he might be gone, or he'd be on the verge of potentially being gone. I don't think there's a big trade market for Daron. I don't. Not with that contract. Not with that contract. So I think there's, a lot at work here. I don't think they're sticking with Daron because they believe they're going to end up having a guy that they've got to, re-sign after 2026. I mean, that would be icing on the cake. What they see right now is a guy that they can't get anything for. The comp pick would exceed what they could get, let's just say if it was a day 3 conditional. And by the way, and this is a big deal, they don't have enough players on their roster who can play at an NFL level and at a high level, at least occasionally. And the other part of this is maybe he is a better fit for a 3-4 defensive end. Maybe. I don't see Duran as a nose. I don't see him as a nose. That would be interesting. I bet you he doesn't want to be a nose. You know, and they're going to have to find a nose tackle. If they're going to be in base 3-4, you know, a lot, if we get the Brian Flores scheme with Durante Jones, I'm not saying that we will. I don't know what we'll get, but that's what we have to go on because that's where he's been recently. And I don't think Kinlaw's the nose. I would think that in a base 3-4, Kinlaw and Payne are your defensive ends. Johnny Newton's part of that rotation. And you've got to find a nose. The guy that played more nose tackle, more zero technique snaps than anybody on that defensive roster last year was Eddie Goldman. He's an unrestricted, and there's not going to be a big market for him. It would not surprise me to see them re-sign Goldman for that primary reason, that he can play that position, or at least the last defensive staff thought he could. Because, you know, they weren't necessarily in a 3-4. They went to that 5-man defensive front, which for all intents and purposes is kind of a 3-4, with the two, you know, outside edges on the line of scrimmage. Yeah, I'm glad Duran's coming back. I hope that this is a year in which he really is ready to go and ready to dominate consistently. And look, if he ends up having a 2022-like season, we know what it is at that point. Then you've got his two best seasons being contract seasons. And maybe at that point, you know, they look, if he has another big year, he'll be certainly a player that people will come after in free agency. And at that point, Washington will at least walk with a comp pick. You know, that comp pick formula is based on also what you add and what you lose. And sometimes it comes out in the wash and you don't get anything. But their best chance probably to get something for Duran is to play him this year in a contract year and then let him walk after 2026 and hopefully end up with a decent comp pick in 2027. It's kind of the way I see it. They may think, no. Duran, we got plans for him. Duran and Kinlaw as 3-4 defensive ends, this is the perfect fit for them. We'll see. I've always liked Duran. I've always felt like, wow, good teammate, good locker room guy, you know, always available, never hurt, never misses games. And his high level is really, really high. The problem is, as we know, it's been consistency throughout his career. All right, a few other things that Peters and Quinn said yesterday next. Kevin Sheehan showed the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
with Jaden, all of our decisions are really in consideration of him. And this one, especially with keeping David Blau and their history for the last 2 years of working together. So that helped a lot, and that gives us a lot of confidence. They have an incredible working relationship, and David's an incredible coach. So that will help speed up the process for sure, where you don't have the getting to know kind of trust building factor. That trust is already built. So that'll really help us moving forward. But, I think that's everything, we're going to be doing is going to be with Jaden in mind.
So Adam Peters said that. We carried that live during the show yesterday. And Rich wrote, catering everything to Jaden Daniels, our general manager just said, that is a huge mistake. Rich, couldn't disagree with you more. Pretty much every single team with an elite level talent at quarterback, everything they do, certainly offensively, is around what the quarterback does well and doesn't do well. Jaden Daniels isn't, calling the shots on offensive coordinator. I think if he were calling the shots, Cliff Kingsbury would still be here. I don't think that is the case at all, and he's not general managing this team. That is a totally acceptable answer from Adam Peters about JD5's, suggested influence on this offseason and the Blau hiring specifically. I mean, you don't think Josh Allen right now is calling shots in Buffalo? He hasn't won a Super Bowl, hasn't been to a Super Bowl. I'm not saying that Jaden Daniels is where Josh Allen is at this point, but Joe Brady is Josh Allen's call. Whatever they do at wide receiver this offseason will be based on what Josh Allen wants. That's a much more significant, role beyond just playing quarterback than what Jaden Daniels has here in Washington. Didn't find that to be off-putting at all. Man, there are some of you that just really want this whole Jaden Daniels thing to either fail, or you just think that this past season is an indication that it is going to fail. I don't get that. I just don't get that. We talked about some of this yesterday when the guy Jason emailed in about Jaden being a fragile one-hit wonder. He's the box should say caution breakable, and then discussed, the idea that there's nothing essentially locked in for after his third season, meaning there's no guarantees that they're going to sign him to a long-term deal or even pick up his fifth-year option, which is absurd. By the way, I failed to mention, and Tommy mentioned this to me yesterday, that immediately when Jason says Jaden Daniels is a fragile one-hit wonder and then suggests to me these stories take time, they're longer than just one chapter, and he writes very much at the end, somewhat condescendingly, be patient, my friend. You, Jason, said at the beginning of your note, Jaden Daniels is a fragile one-hit wonder. After one season and barely a second, that's not patience, my friend, big fella, champ. It isn't. I don't. It's really interesting to me that some of you have gotten to the point in just 1 year where we've gone from Jaden is the Messiah. Jaden is, as Tommy says, the sun that everything revolves around. And anybody, by the way, that was in the orbit of Jaden Daniels after 2024, they all basically were along for the ride. Adam Peters, let him cook. Adam Peters, chess over checkers. Dan Quinn, I was wrong. Brilliant hire. Cliff Kingsbury, my God, QB guru. Love his creativity. And after a season in which Jaden played 4 complete games out of 17. 4 out of 17. Some actually think that he might not be around here, or that now you're nitpicking quotes like Rich did with Adam Peters because he is, too much in control or too much of a shot caller. I just don't even think that's in his personality, personally. Anyway, there was more from Adam Peters on Jaden Daniels.
some of these injuries, right, for anybody are freak injuries and things that would happen to anybody. But Jaden's well aware of, just being able to protect himself and understanding the importance of that and being available. And we've talked about this a lot, but he's certainly understands that. And but it's not just on Jaden; it's on all of us. It's on our scouting staff to find the receivers and the linemen and the running backs to support him, so he doesn't have to do it all himself. It's on the coaches, with the way they coach him and the plays we call him, the scheme and everything like that. So it's a team effort, but certainly it is a premium to keep him healthy for sure.
Yeah, the one thing he didn't say in that answer that he did say at that season-ending presser, is, part of what we have to do to support Jaden is build up our defense too. That is such a crucial element to this upcoming season. We all know that. Hardly breaking news here. But in terms of Jaden's performance and the offense's performance in 2026, it starts with a defense getting occasional stops, rising up to something approaching competent, something approaching maybe the middle. I mean, the middle would be, you get the 2024 offense with a 2026 defense that is in the middle of the league, you're a contender. You're an absolute contender. I'm not expecting it to rise to the middle. Who knows? Defense very variable, much more so than offense year to year. But you cannot be a dynamic offensive football team statistically and otherwise if you're not on the field. And so your defense has to get you back out onto the field faster than it's done and with a better context to the game score-wise. Last year was a joke. Last year's final 8-9 games were an absolute joke, how bad that defense was. And yeah, a lot of that had to do with the injuries, just like the offensive issues they had were related to injuries. But my God, that was one of the worst defenses over the last 9-10 games I have ever seen in my life. And they were, according to Bill Barnwell, a lot of those post-Dallas, losing Dorrance Armstrong stats were some of the worst we've seen in recent NFL history defensively. It's funny, Max and I were talking the other day. I don't know how we got into this, but you said something like, well, what was the worst game of last season? And I said, man, there are several choices on the worst game. I think for me, the moment that I knew it was completely over, was Detroit. They were 3-6 going into that game. And we had these, at least the prospect that Jaden might be back after the bye week for the Denver game. So could you split with Detroit and Miami and get to, 4-7 and then make a big run at the end of the year, with, a schedule that was lightening up other than Denver. You had the Giants twice. You had Minnesota on the road. They weren't very good at that point. And that Detroit game for me was, oh my God, the Lions just scored on 8 out of 8 possessions. And the 9th possession, they ran the clock out. I don't think I've ever seen a game like that. We talked about it the day after. They scored on 8 out of 8 possessions to start the game into the early fourth quarter. And then in their final drive of the game, they just ran the clock out. They did not punt once in the game. There actually was never a threat of them punting in the game. The only thing that happened occasionally is that Washington got a stop or they got a Detroit mistake that led to field goals instead of touchdowns. There's never been a game like that. There wasn't a game like that one last year. That was the worst of many. There are many options. You could easily go to the Seattle game the week before. You could say the Minnesota game was the worst because it was the one in which you didn't see the effort that they seem to give week in and week out every other week of the season. That was the worst for me, the Detroit game. What was the worst for you, Max? Worst game of 2025?
So you mentioned it the week prior to that Detroit game. The Detroit game doesn't rank as high for me as it does for you, but I think it's because the Seattle game was really the one where I left feeling the most dejected. Because the first half happened, and I said, you know what? Why not keep it on? How could this possibly get worse? Shouldn't have asked that question because Jaden Daniels immediately proceeded to bend his elbow the wrong direction. So the Seattle game for me is the one where it's like, oh, this is cursed season, it's over type vibes. But number 2 would probably be Minnesota, and then I think I'm putting Detroit at number 3. That was just a defense, like just the final nail in the coffin for Joe Witt was, I think, the Detroit game.
The Seattle game's really bad. I'm going back.
Really bad.
12 plays, 90 yards, touchdown, first drive. Second drive, 7 plays, 60 yards, touchdown. Next one was 1 play, 26 yards after a fumble, touchdown. Next one was 4 plays, 87 yards, touchdown. And the final one at the end of the half, 4 plays, 53 yards, field goal, 31-7. Yeah, that was jaw-dropping. At that point, that's at that point in the season where they had actually played well on the Monday night against Kansas City for a half. But you saw that after they lost Jaden in the Cowboys game and had lost Dorrance Armstrong in the Cowboys game, it cratered after that. Because the Seattle game, you were still just 3 weeks or 2 games removed from getting to 4-2 on the season with the Bears on Monday night, and you had the fumble late in the game. But the Detroit game, I can't remember seeing a team dominate. And the thing about it is Washington wasn't close in that game. Like Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra, it didn't matter who it was. One player after another is catching the ball with nobody within 5 yards. Nobody within 5 yards. And then Gibbs is averaging 10 yards a carry, and Montgomery's averaging 5 yards a carry. Suter said after that game he was convinced that Detroit never had to throw the football if they didn't want to win the game. Like they could have had 0 pass attempts and still won the game. And really the only plays that weren't good for Detroit were Detroit-inflicted plays. Goff missed a receiver or somebody dropped a ball. That was the game. I digress here. Something made me think of the conversation we had the other day off the air. That was 100% the game for me. I did want to play some of what Dan Quinn said yesterday as well. And then we'll go around the NFL, where I do think there's a possibility for Marcus Mariota outside of Washington. Somebody has suggested that, and I think it's a perfect fit. We'll discuss that next.
talked about how important it is to turn the page and get ready for what's ahead and the challenges that go with that. Honestly, it's a similar message today. The biggest difference is the record. And they were way different, but the message should still be similar each and every year as you're going through it and the process that you go through to get there. So whether you kick ass and throw a hell of a year or not nearly enough wins, the only carryovers I really want are the lessons that you want to take, from that season and don't repeat them again. And they're playing for us. But as it begins, there's a cool part to this process. We had free agency meetings last week. Now here, I'm doing a lot of the interviews in the evenings. There's a lot of cool things that start during this week and envisioning, what parts of your team could look different, by adding some of the players.
Dan Quinn yesterday at the Indy Combine. Man, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of content this time of year. And when we get to the games, a lot of what's said just doesn't apply. But when it comes to what Dan Quinn's good at, that is sustainable, and that is a culture that doesn't lose the locker room in a terrible season like the one they had last year, a culture that, embraces smart, hard work, and incredible competitive motor. And it's what they've looked for with almost every player that they've acquired. I don't think that the culture they've created here is one in which there's great risk at a long, sustained run of losing. That's what they used to have. The culture was set up for a loser, a loser every year, and you had to overcome the culture. And every bad franchise does overcome bad culture every once in a while. And it's the way the league is designed for every bad franchise to occasionally have a good season. But a good season does not make a good franchise. And in Washington's case, a bad season does not make a bad franchise. I still feel very good about what they've done from a culture standpoint. I know we're comparing to the worst of the worst. I get it. And it feels so much better because it's not the clown show that it was for 2 decades. But I do believe that Dan Quinn has something to him that will stop, a bad losing streak. I think that there is a real culture in place that prevents a sustained run of losing. And look, if you had another bad season and this one wasn't due to injury, he may not get the opportunity to prove that. But I like their chances to bounce back this year. I do. He did say something about close to finalizing the draft board and the offseason plan. I would hope so. The offseason has begun here. But here is what he said specifically about that.
I would say probably a day or two away from all the way finalizing. But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty intact. And we've had good meetings with the coaches. They've begun that process. We had a week last week where a lot of it was devoted to free agency. But it's been nice to see David and Durante and the staffs, kind of build their connection as they're talking through systems together. There's some good energy that comes from that because you're actually starting at the beginning to say, well, this is why we're going to call this, and this is how we want to play this. And so I like that feeling of what that is. And I like, what I'm seeing so far from them.
Dan Quinn. Yeah, the offseason has begun. They, re-signed Andrew Wiley the other day. We're going to get news here periodically for the next few weeks. This was Dan Quinn specific to the qualities that he wants to see in a pass rusher.
That ability to affect the QB, it's one of the biggest tenets in winning the game, for obviously scoring and that, but the ability to hit and pressure the quarterback. It also forces takeaways. Those are things. So you want to see somebody that has demonstrated speed and initial quickness to beat somebody on the field. And I think that can be one thing as we get into this week and you hear timings and that, hey, man, let's go back to that demonstrated speed on the field and playmaking ability. And so that at the top is what I see. But beating somebody to the punch, having an explosive, get off to make someone feel like overwhelmed. That's what all of the great rushers have.
It's what all the great rushers have. They got to get themselves at least one, if not two or three. They have to have edge-setting run stoppers and fear-inducing pass rushers this year. Have to go get it, and they've got to be aggressive in going to get it. And the draft may produce somebody that projects to be that, but they need that now. They need somebody that can go get the quarterback. And they're going to have to find it, I think, in free agency, because you can't count on the draft being right. And even if you think you have the right guy, it doesn't mean he's going to produce right away. All right. There's been a lot of NFL news here recently. Let's get to some of it, Max. No games to talk about, but what do you want to start with?
Man, we could start anywhere. I mean, it's been a kind of a big week, but you did mention the quarterback battle in Cleveland might be a little bit more competitive than we first thought.
Yeah, it looks like Cleveland's actually considering Deshaun Watson to be a possibility to start for the Browns next year. That would be one of the all-time great comeback stories. You know, I was thinking about Deshaun Watson because of all of the issues he's had personally, which have really derailed his career. And I think the last time we really Deshaun Watson play, even before the injury, he looked completely disinterested in playing. We saw that in 2024 against our team here. He looked like a player that wanted to be doing anything other than playing football. But he is 30 years old. A 30-year-old at that position isn't at times even in their prime years yet. It's the way that position is. Some of the best football comes for quarterbacks in their early to mid 30s. He's 6'3". He's 230 pounds. He was a 3-time Pro Bowl quarterback in Houston. It's a long time ago. It'll be 6 seasons removed from that. And he really didn't play that well in Cleveland. In 2023, there were signs that he was coming around, but ultimately not enough. And then 2024 looked like an absolute disaster. They have Dylan Gabriel. They have Shadur Sanders. There have been rumors about perhaps Kyler Murray. But the new general manager in Cleveland says, don't count out Deshaun Watson. If Watson came back and won the job, it would be one of the more incredible comebacks, especially if he played well. Winning the job wouldn't be a big deal given the landscape, given the competitive landscape at that position in Cleveland. But if he played well, Cleveland just needs average quarterbacking with that defense to be a much better football team. In fact, they were pretty much the only really good defense in 2026 that didn't have a good football season. Every other really good defense ended up winning more games than they lost, or 8 and 9-ish, somewhere around there. Yeah, Deshaun Watson would be an interesting story and isn't done yet. Meantime, I mentioned Kyler Murray to Cleveland as a possibility. He would be the one guy, if I were in the quarterback market right now, Max, if I were, in Arizona, a Minnesota, a Miami, perhaps Pittsburgh, Jets, he'd be the guy that I would not want. There is something about Kyler Murray every time I watch him that says that, yes, we've had all of these reclamation projects. We've seen so many resuscitations to careers in recent years, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, et cetera. The list goes on. I don't see it with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, every time he plays, looks like he's 5'6" to me. He looks like the guy that is legitimately too short to play the position. He's also got major red flags around him and has had them since he came out. And that is preparation, work ethic, how much does he love football, etc. Now, he's a guy that's only 29 years old entering next season, and he's played some good football at times. He would not be a guy that I would want if I were Cleveland, Miami, Minnesota, the Jets, potentially Pittsburgh, potentially Indy. That would be the guy I would not want. I would much rather take a shot on Malik Willis than go with Kyler Murray. Malik Willis really was quite good in those two games that he came in for Jordan Love in. You know, the Chicago game on that Saturday night, I believe, in December, where he was amazing. And then in that, game against Baltimore that he had to start, he was really good. I mean, I think Malik Willis looks like a guy that you'd want to give a shot to. Now, I've seen some of the contract numbers. They're talking about a deal comparable to Sam Darnold's deal last year, something like 3 for $100 million, in that 30 to 35 million per year range. Man, quarterbacks. But I actually liked Malik Willis coming out of Liberty, and I didn't know what the jump would be, and he looked terrible in those first, few opportunities in Tennessee. Terrible. I mean, they played a game against Kansas City on a Sunday night where legitimately he couldn't throw the football downfield. He could not throw a forward pass, so they just started calling runs with him in the game. Many of the runs were his. Malik Willis would be much more interesting to me if I were in that quarterback market. But here's the one that I think is interesting because it affects us. So Seth Walder from ESPN wrote a story this morning about predicting all 32 NFL starting quarterbacks for the 2026 season. And he predicted for Kansas City, Marcus Mariota. He wrote the following. Of course, this hinges on the recovery timeline of Patrick Mahomes, who had surgery in December to repair 2 ligaments in his left knee. Mahomes has indicated he wants to be back for week 1, and perhaps that will happen. But any prediction about his week 1 status is just a guess. So I imagine that the Chiefs would want to be cautious with Mahomes, given his importance to the franchise. If that's the case, they'd want a reliable backup who can ideally win a few games while Mahomes finishes up his recovery. I believe Mariota fits the bill. The 32-year-old stood in for Jaden Daniels for 8 starts in Washington last year and was a capable quarterback with a 50.2 QBR. He's got a long history of being solid, which is essentially what Kansas City needs, a player who can keep the team afloat in Mahomes' absence but is willing to be a backup and won't be overly expensive. I think that's the perfect fit for Mariota if it's not here. Mariota is, I think, not as versatile as Jaden is. I think Jaden fits in almost any offense. And look, Mariota had a really good year with Matt LaFleur as his offensive coordinator in Tennessee several years ago before LaFleur got the job in Green Bay. So there is some versatility. I'm not suggesting he's super rigid and only fits a Cliff Kingsbury-style offense. But Mariota really is a dual threat RPO, primarily shotgun QB. That's where he excels. The last 2 years was the perfect football fit for Mariota, probably the perfect locker room fit because they loved him and he seemed to love them. Loved playing mentor to Jaden Daniels. Didn't seem to have a problem with not starting and obviously got many opportunities this past season to start. But Marcus Mariota to Kansas City makes a lot of sense to me if they don't bring him back here. And that's, an interesting situation because we are not talking about backup quarterback here at all. I think everybody just assumes that Mariota will be back. Well, if he's got a chance as an early season starter waiting for an injured player to return, like in Kansas City, or like in Indianapolis, if they were to re-sign Daniel Jones, because Jones probably won't be back for the beginning of the season. That might be a long shot at this point for him. I mean, Mariota may want an opportunity to play or at least play stand-in for a while in a place. And look, there are possibilities for him outside of Washington with the way he played. I don't know if it's to be a full-time starter, right from the jump. other than in these stand-in situations. But it could be in Arizona where he competes with Jacoby Brissett or somebody else for a starting job. It could be in Atlanta, although the Stefanski system, a little bit more about what he's about to be involved with here. There are going to be some options for Mariota, some legitimate options for Marcus Mariota to go have a chance to compete. I don't know that he could get a starting job essentially promised to him or to stand in. I mean, if that happens, if free agency, we saw Marcus Mariota walk from Washington, what's Washington doing backup quarterback-wise, Max? Do they think Jeff Driscoll is good enough to be a backup quarterback?
Maybe. Who knows? I really don't know where they're going to go. It's kind of slim pickings given the backup quarterback market right now. So who knows? They could go somewhere in the draft, but I doubt that's going to happen with how few picks we got.
It's something we have not thought about much. I thought that if Kingsbury got an OC job or a head coaching job, I thought there was a really good chance Mariota would follow Kingsbury. But he's in L.A. with the Rams where Garoppolo's the backup to Stafford. I guess Stafford could retire, and all of a sudden the Rams have a quarterback need. But I don't think that's the right fit offensively for Mariota. Kansas City's the perfect fit. Kansas City plays offensive football like Washington does, with maybe less hurry up or less no huddle. But the pace is the same. The RPO percentage is essentially the same. The shotgun versus under center is very similar. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if Mariota were to leave for a stand-in starting position or maybe an opportunity to compete somewhere, Miami, Arizona, etc., what does Washington do at backup quarterback? On their roster right now are players, the only players technically under contract are Jaden Daniels and Sam Hartman. Because Driscoll's a free agent. Josh Johnson's a free agent. Is Josh Johnson going to catch on with another team? Is Josh Johnson the backup here? They did go more under center at the end of the year with Josh Johnson starting because he was more comfortable with that. That would be interesting. Somebody mentioned to me last week, what about Kirk Cousins here as the backup? He's perfect for the David Blau system. He's good friends with David Blau. He was in the locker room in Minnesota with David Blau. David Blau spoke very highly of him when he was introduced 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, whatever it was, as the new offensive coordinator. He mentioned that, the influences included being around Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, I think you want, even though the system would probably be right for Cousins, I think you still want a backup that can do what Jaden Daniels can do stylistically. That's why Mariota was such a great fit, because they played football the same way. And I don't think, a guy, I guess somebody could be like is Gardner Minshew a free agent?
I believe he is. I think he might not. Yeah, no, he is 29. Yeah, he's entering unrestricted free agency this year. Another guy that has a similar. I mean, he can run and he can throw that damn ball. Zach Wilson is only turning 27, and is becoming a free agent. So there could be that.
Where did he play last year?
Miami.
What about a guy like Tyrod Taylor?
Also on the list.
Yeah, somebody like him would make sense to me.
Yeah, I could see that.
How old is he? He's probably in his mid to late 30s,
36 and a half. He'll be
36 and a half.
He'll be 37,
wow.
I think.
Look at you.
League year start.
Uh-huh. It'd be interesting if Mariota decides to leave and gets an opportunity somewhere, what Washington would do at backup quarterback. You got to have one. You have to have one. Now, look, if Jaden misses 13 games again next year, they're going to have a very similar record to the one they had this year, because there's nobody that you can go get as a backup free agent quarterback that is going to give you what Jaden gave you or even give you what Mariota gave you. My preference is bring Mariota back. I just wonder if there will be an opportunity for him. There was more NFL news that I wanted to get to. We'll get to that next. All right, you had some other things NFL news wise that you wanted to get to me, get to with me. So let's do it.
Yeah, it's been a big week. I mean, Combine week. All the coaches and GMs are talking. But there was one that I did want to kind of highlight. Sean Payton is giving up play calling duties and giving them up.
Yeah,
giving them to Davis Webb. Davis Webb is a big candidate this year in the coaching search and market, but didn't find a job. Didn't get promoted anywhere or sent to a head coaching position. He was the quarterback's coach. And now it looks like he's going to be taking over as the offensive coordinator and calling plays for the Broncos. So what do you got there?
Well, I think that's the reason that he stayed in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
I think if he doesn't get that promise from Sean Payton to have an opportunity to call plays, he ends up somewhere else, maybe in Buffalo. Maybe as Buffalo's head coach. Remember, that was a possibility. He's best friends with Josh Allen. So there were going to be some big opportunities for Webb. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that, he got elevated to the OC and now is being given play calling responsibilities. I guess the surprise is that Sean Payton, who has always appeared to be a major control freak, is giving that up for the first time in his career. And I wonder, if it's one of those things where at the first sign of trouble offensively, if we don't get a story week 5, week 6, Sean Payton's taking back play calling. We'll see. I mean, I don't know enough about Davis Webb other than what I've read, which is he's one of those guys like David Blau, who everybody believed from the moment they were around him that he was eventually going to become an OC and an eventual head coach.
Well,
it is interesting, though, Sean Payton giving that up.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the only way he was able to keep him.
And
What else?
speaking of David Blau, Dan Campbell had some interesting things to say about him at Combine Media Day. JP was out there, so he asked him point blank directly about David Blau and how the Lions were going to be or thinking about hiring him and bringing him in as their OC next year.
I love Blau. I mean, he was one of the guys that I wanted to bring in, and Coach Quinn and those guys went ahead and named him OC, which is smart by them. I think Blau is a young rising coach in this league. I've been around him firsthand, and he's another one, man. He's sharp. He understands football and quarterback play. He knows the run game. And he's a detail guy, and he's competitive, man. He's very competitive. So I think he's going to do a great job.
Yeah, and the belief certainly is, I thought I saw the quote include Dan Campbell admitting that Blau would have been there hired. He didn't just do that, did he?
I mean, he did it kind of very brief. He's like he was one of the guys I wanted to hire. He says kind of right here.
I mean, he was one of the guys that I wanted to bring in, and
so that I think is probably part of it.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to bring him in last year, and then the thought was that if Washington had not moved quickly, that Blau would have been right now the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. Yeah, all right. Good. I mean, look, I don't need Dan Campbell's validation. I actually feel good about this. As a fan, I don't feel like this is a massive risk. I've said this a dozen times since the hiring of both Durante Jones and David Blau. To me, the two are completely different. They're the same in that neither one of them's actually done it before. They're totally different in that Durante Jones is another guy that hasn't done it before that Dan Quinn's going with. He went with that with Joe Witt Jr. It did not work. He's going to do it again with Durante Jones. It certainly, I mean, even Quinn said to me 2 weeks ago that, bold. And I think that is bold. Now, it may be that they didn't have a lot of, resumed, experienced options defensively. But that to me is bold and out on a limb, even though I don't feel bad about the hire. I love the system in which he's coming from and certainly seems impressive, but we'll see. With Blau, the reason it's different than Durante Jones is that there's nobody in that building that didn't support this. They all saw it coming too. They all wanted that to happen too. So it's not like Dan Quinn is like, I know I'm sticking my neck out here. I know I'm going out on a limb. I know you guys want me to look at this guy, and that guy, but I'm telling you, David Blau's the guy. We have him right here. I'm going to promote him. He's going to be our offensive coordinator. Trust me. He didn't need to pitch that inside the building. They all knew where they were going when it became clear that they were going to move on from Cliff. That's the move they wanted to make. Now, Mike McDaniel becoming available, the issue there was if there was any sincere interest, he was going to have to wait. And waiting meant risking losing David Blau to Detroit or somewhere else. It would have been more than just Detroit that would have had interest. Remember, 3 teams wanted to interview him last year, and Washington blocked those interviews in 2024. So I really, not only do I feel good about the Blau hire, I can't wait to see what it looks like. Because I do think, and I've always said this, I think that kind of offense, Ben Johnson, Kevin O'Connell, Shanahan-style, McVay-style offense actually fits Jaden perfectly. Not that Cliff's wasn't good for him, too. I think Jaden would succeed in almost any offense. And if Cliff had come back, I would have been fine with that. But I'm excited about that. So, all right, Dan Campbell, for what it's worth, if you needed it, says Washington did the right thing. What else do you have?
So I'm not sure how much you've been keeping up with the ongoings of the kicker free agent market, Kevin.
I'm not.
I didn't think so. But the Cowboys and Brandon Aubrey are having a little bit of a beef over his contract because he's going to be a restricted free agent coming into this offseason.
So he's restricted.
Yes, he's a restricted free agent. So the Cowboys are thinking about placing the second round tender on Aubrey. So that'll cost about 5.8, just under 6. But I believe the report, he has asked for a deal closer to $10 million a season, according to sources with close to his agent Todd France.
Where does that rank? That'd be number 1?
$10 million would be far and away number 1. Harrison Butker, I believe, makes 7.3 on the cap hit. So yeah, that would be by far the most for a kicker out there right now
I'm actually interested in this now. Kicker salaries. Kicker contracts, spot track, average salary. Harrison Butker, $6.4 million per year. He signed a 4-year, $25 million deal with $17 million guaranteed, by far and away the most ever guaranteed to a kicker. Jake Elliott second at $6 million. Cameron Dicker at $5.5 million. Evan McPherson, Graham Gano, Will Lutz, Fairbairn. That's another question. We talked about backup quarterback. Who's Washington going to get as a kicker? But as far as, you know what? He's worth it. You give him.
He would be, yeah.
He's the one that's worth it. Brandon Aubrey, if you get to midfield, you are in field goal range in an indoor setup for sure. Midfield from 67 yards out, you're in range. So, yeah, 10 million. I mean, I'd give it to him. He's a big part of their offense. He's a big part of the way teams handle special teams, decisions that teams make offensively with the football. He is a real impactful kicker, especially with the new rules. Let's see who's a free agent out there. Unrestricted free agent kickers. Eddie Pinheiro. Didn't he kick really well for the 49ers this year? Pinheiro?
I don't remember.
Zane Gonzalez, we had him. He kicked well in Atlanta.
He did. He was back in his unit, in his normal colors.
Maybe we can get Doink back. Joey Sly's available. All the guys we've had here, Joey Sly, Zane Gonzalez, Riley Patterson, they're all unrestricted free agents. Jake Moody is a restricted free agent for Washington, so I guess they're going to certainly figure out a way to bring him into camp at the very least, right? I mean, you only have 7 unrestricted free agent kickers. Carlson, the guy in Vegas, Nick Folk, Joey Sly, Matt Prater, Zane Gonzalez, Riley Patterson, and Eddie Pinheiro. I thought I might need to look this up to make sure I'm right, but I thought he had a very good year in San Francisco. Had some big kicks and didn't miss any kicks or miss few. I'm looking at his stats.
Wait a minute.
What?
28 of 29 in 2025 regular season, 5 of 5. You know, we're just going to go 6 of 7 from 50 plus. And then in the postseason, he made 3 kicks, he attempted 3 kicks, made all 3 of them. And so he has an 89.7 through his career. So yeah, Eddie Pinheiro.
96.6% last year, 28 out of 29. Like you said, he had a 59-yarder. He did miss 4 extra points, though. Missed 4 PATs. It's always weird. Like some of these kickers, they have a higher field goal percentage than they do a PAT percentage. All right, what else you got?
So the last one I got, there's a little bit of strife. Well, I mean, we are veterans of this game. Trent Williams and the San Francisco 49ers are still trying to hammer out a contract. As it stands, Trent Williams is entering the final year of his deal. The salary cap number of $38.84 million, which includes a base salary of $22.21 and has a $10 million option due in the coming weeks. That option has increased the urgency to strike a deal that works for both sides. So Trent Williams is still in negotiations, and the Niners GM John Lynch says he is optimistic. But we were optimistic once before, and look how that turned out.
Yeah, but Trent Williams actually likes being in San
Francisco. That is also an important
difference.
point of this, yeah.
Trent Williams is 30. He's going to be 38 years old.
Damn.
And
he's still doing it.
He's still doing it, man. I mean, this is the thing about that position. You know, remember Jason Peters was playing at a high level till he was 38, 39 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So he is under contract for this upcoming season, but what do they want to do? Restructure it so it's not a huge cap hit? Because it's a $39 million cap hit in 2026.
That would appear
so they're going to extend him and lower that cap number. Is that the goal here for the 49ers?
I feel like that is kind of what they're angling for, but I know Trent's going to want to get paid, so.
Whew. I mean, he still played at a super high level this year. You keep paying him. You keep figuring it out until he can't do it anymore. A $39 million cap hit for any player that isn't a quarterback is crazy. But it really does speak to the importance of that position, which is why, Paulie, I love you, but the idea that they would trade Laramie Tunsil or that you wanted them to trade Laramie Tunsil and bring a lot back is insane. You just don't find these guys. It's so hard to find the Trent Williamses and the Penei Sewells and the Laramie Tunsils and the Lane Johnsons. And I just gave you a couple of right tackles. The left tackle, forget about it. It's just hard to find them. And they're so crucial. The offensive line in general, but that left tackle position, I remember in recent years, people have said now, with the interior pass rush, interior offensive linemen are so much more important. They're important too, but you got to have your tackles because they're going to face the other team's best pass rushers. They're going to be locked up with the other team's game wreckers if they have them. So you have to have buttoned up situations at tackle. You just do. I think Trent Williams will get whatever he's looking for. If you're the 49ers after the season you had, getting players back healthy for next year, you can't. It's like, again, Washington's in the same position. You can't let him. Now with Trent, unless they think this is going to be it, age 38 season is going to be it, but I guarantee you they don't. They probably see him playing at a high level for another 2 or 3 years. I mean, Trent Williams has worked his way in, people, to borderline first ballot Hall of Fame territory. Of course, he's a Hall of Famer. Like, that is not even debatable. But we're talking about he is first ballot Hall of Fame level. And, of course, he'll go in as a 49er. He is a 12-time Pro Bowl player and a 3-time All-Pro. First-team All-Pro. That's actually amazing to me that he hasn't made first-team All-Pro more than 3 times. All right. Did you have anything else?
No, that was kind of the last of the combine wrap-up.
Yeah. Washington needs a kicker, and they may need a backup quarterback. There's no doubt. All right. When we come back, I want to talk about the Olympics a little bit, just briefly, and we will do that after this. I do want to mention real quickly, Window Nation's offering a great deal, and there are only 3 days left for you to take advantage of this great deal. They're offering 4 free windows with every 4 purchased. So that is essentially half price on your purchase. But they've added another 10% in the form of a discount for the month of February because of Valentine's Day, which was, now 11 days ago, but they're still giving you an extra 10%. And then they're offering the opportunity for you to not pay anything for these new windows, which you will be eventually paying less than 50% of the retail price for. If you don't want to pay anything for 2 full years, no down payment required, no monthly payments required, and no interest charged on your new windows. So you'll get the benefit of new windows making your home look nicer. You'll get the benefit of new windows that are better insulated, lowering your utility bills, both in summer and in winter. And you won't have to pay anything until the year 2028. All I ask is give Window Nation a chance to come out and give you a free in-home estimate. No obligation, no pressure applied. They will let you make the choice. They'll leave you with the quote after being in and out of your home in about 45 minutes. That's all it takes for you to get a quote. But if you've been thinking about new windows, just give Window Nation a shot. They are the best when it comes to not only the offer that I've described, but customer service. 45,000 five-star reviews, #1 rated by Forbes magazine among window installation companies in the country. And they are incredibly efficient when it comes to customer service. 96% of their overall installs require no follow-up service. 1,500 styles to choose from and a lifetime warranty, that is. 866-90-NATION, windownation.com. So I got this from Dana. I got it from her the other day, and I've been meaning to get to it. Dana wrote after I talked about the Olympics last week a couple of times. I talked about Michaela Schifrin's incredible performance in the women's slalom and her incredible communication afterwards about how she handled the sadness of her father's passing a few years ago and how she dealt with that in the context of competing and trying to win again. But I talked a lot about Alyssa Liu, who won the figure skating gold medal for the U.S. in the women's individual. And Dana writes, Kevin, I'm so glad you talked about the Olympics. I didn't expect it, especially when you talked about figure skating and gave respect to Alyssa Liu. I'm a skating instructor in Northern Virginia, and I can say without hesitation, her free skate was the best ever. Thank you for talking about it, and I agree with you. She's going to make millions. Yeah, she's got it. There's no doubt about that. And it doesn't matter, who you are or what you believe in or whether you're male, female. It doesn't matter. She's got the it factor in a major way. I mean, just natural charisma that is so infectious. But anyway, so last week I did watch her free skate. I didn't plan on watching her free skate. It was just perfect timing. I was on NBC, and they did a profile of her before her free skate. Now, I guess it had happened earlier in the day. This was primetime NBC Olympic coverage on, was it Thursday night, Friday night, maybe? I think it was Thursday night because I talked about it on Friday. But they did this profile on her. I didn't know anything about her, had never heard anything about her, was not really following the Olympics. I was looking forward to the hockey stuff, but really hadn't watched anything until Michaela Schifrin earlier in that week. And before her free skate, they did this profile on her. And I thought it was so interesting. If you don't know her story, her father fled China after being a part of the Tiananmen Square protests in '89, came to the U.S. With basically nothing, settled in Northern California in Oakland, opened up a law practice after getting his law degree, and then had 5 children via surrogates. And then his oldest daughter, Alyssa, had this skating talent, and he estimates that he spent between $500,000 and $1 million on her skating development and career, a career that saw her win big at the age of 13 years old. The U.S. Figure Skating Championships, she won at 13. She became a significant figure in the sport at a very young age. And he totally invested in his kids, became one of those parents too, overbearing. Coaches prohibited him from showing up to the rink for her practices. And with all the success, which included, by the way, her finishing 6th in the Beijing Olympics at the age of 16. But in advance of the Beijing Olympics in 2022, China came after her and tried to recruit her and offered her family, her father, and her millions of dollars to compete for China. She wasn't from China. She was a born and raised U.S. citizen, grew up in Northern California. The father was Chinese, and they turned the money down. Estimates are that they got offered up to $10 million to compete in the Beijing Olympics for China, and they turned it down. But skating became, we've seen this story play out many times, the Jennifer Capriati's of the world, individual, sports, major pressure from parents, major, no true upbringing as a child, as a kid, not enjoying anything other than being focused on this one thing. And she quit at 16. She told everybody, I'm done. I hate this. I want to be a kid for the first time in my life at 16 years old, with all of the people involved at that point. I mean, she's already, a bona fide U.S. figure skating star. And she quit at the age of 16 after the Beijing Olympics or shortly thereafter. And that was it for people in skating, because they'll say, and part of it was her two coaches said that, once you get off the track and you're not training every day and you don't make it your life and you don't make it your job, you don't come back. People just pass you and you don't come back. But she went on some skiing trip with the family about 2 years ago. And while she was learning how to ski, she had never skied in her life, apparently. Well, while she was learning how to ski, she decided at that moment she missed skating. And so she reached out to her two coaches and said, I want to skate again. And one of her coaches said, oh, that's great. Go skate. There's lots of places you can do that. And she said, no, I want to come back and I want to compete again. And he claims that he spent 2 hours trying to talk her out of it and gave her all the reasons why it wouldn't work and why it wouldn't be worth it. And she said, well, I'm going to do it with you or without you. And this time we're going to do it my way. Now, understand, she's 18 years old at this point. She had enrolled at UCLA, went to school, went and hung out with friends, went on a backpacking trip somewhere over in Nepal. I mean, she did a lot of things that she just never had time to do. And she came back and she said to her coaches and to her father, she basically first said, you're out. And her father didn't like it, accepted it, didn't like it. And he said in one of the profile pieces that I've watched after the fact, he said, I spent $500,000 to $1 million developing you into a skating star and giving you this opportunity. It was a tough pill to swallow that I was kind of out. And she told her coaches, it's all me. I'm making the decisions on when I practice, when I don't, what I eat, what I don't eat, what I will do in my programs from an artistic standpoint, from a music standpoint, from what I wear to everything. And you guys are along for the ride. And they committed to it. And one of her coaches said, I realized that I was now talking to an adult. And she had been dropped off at the skating rink as a kid for all of those years. And now I was talking to an adult. And so we went with it, not expecting anything. And she even said, I wasn't expecting to compete at the Olympics. I was just expecting to go out there and give it my best and have fun skating. And this is where, I thought the story was interesting, because then she skated. And if you haven't seen her, free skate, it's the final part of, the chase for the podium for medals. It's that last part. It's the longest part. I think there's a short program, and then there's the free skate. I don't know if there's anything else involved. Sorry. I think that's how it works. There's a short program, and then a couple of days later or nights later, there is the, free skate. And her free skate, I don't know anything about skating, but it was a captivating performance. It was so good. It was like when you watch sports, individual or team sports, and you see somebody who is in the zone and they make it look so easy and they make it look so effortless and they look like they're having a great time. Like there's no pressure at all. I mean, that's one of those sports, like when you're watching these figure skaters, you can tell like the whole world is on their shoulders. The weight, the pressure. And so many of these girls, when they're done, they just break down and they're crying. And it's just like, it's a relief thing. Not with Alyssa Liu. I mean, there was no crying. There was a total embracing of the moment, as if I kind of knew I was going to do that, but I didn't have to do that. She kicked everybody's backside and won gold medal. And Dana says it's the greatest free skate ever. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have a lot to compare it to. I do remember some of the skaters of the 80s, Katarina Witt, for the East German. She was a superstar just in sports, especially if you were a young male. And there were, Debbie Thomas. I remember her. Tanya Harding and, Nancy Kerrigan. I remember that whole thing. That's a long time ago, man. Long time ago now. And the U.S., I didn't even know this before the event. The U.S. had not won gold in the women's figure skating in 24 years. And the woman that last won it, her name was Sarah Hughes, I think, didn't even ring a bell, had no recollection of her. But this performance, I'm telling you, I don't care what kind of sports fan you are or you think you are. Just go to YouTube and watch Alyssa Liu's free skate from last week, the one in which she won gold medal in. It is truly like, a quarterback who can't miss and goes for 400, 4 touchdowns, no picks, and throws 33 out of 39. It is the basketball player that goes for 45, and it really doesn't even feel like it. There was literally no pressure. And in watching it, after sort of being captivated by the performance, I just thought, wow, this is going to, from a sports psychology standpoint, this is going to change some theories. I'm not saying that this one event is going to bring up any super new ideas, but the artistry, the joy, the lack of any external pressure, and yet she still attained and achieved the highest level in the sport. She was asked, I think going into it or maybe after it by, I think it was Andrea Mitchell, who was the interviewer for NBC. Do you consider yourself more athlete or artist? And she immediately said artist. That's what I got the most fun out of. But she said, I really like being an athlete too. But the whole, have to do it this way, have to be regimented, have to be disciplined, can't eat this, can't, do this, can't put yourself at risk here. She basically said, yeah, we're doing it this way. I don't care if I win or lose. Now, there's got to be a little bit of killer in her, because she went out and slayed it. And I'm not saying that if she hadn't, she would have reacted any differently, because that's what you got out of it. It was like she was there to perform, not to win necessarily. And her joy in performing led to her winning. Like, there's a mental giant in there somewhere. I thought it was so interesting. I think it still is interesting to consider that performance. And it's a career that, I guess at 24, she's certainly not too old, I don't think, in that sport to compete. So in 4 years, she'll probably be competing again. But in the meantime, I would imagine, between 2026 and 2030, she's going to make a lot of money if she wants to. Maybe she won't want to do that. But I would imagine her desire to perform and to express her art will also involve a big paycheck with it. Yeah, thank you, Dana, for that. I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't necessarily have anything to compare it to. I just was caught up in the moment on Friday's show of having watched it and said, wow. Not to mention, by the way, there is a level of athleticism with skaters that you have to acknowledge. I think the same about gymnasts in the same way. There is certainly a level of athletic ability that is a part of that sport. I mean, I understand there's an artistic part, and I think you get, scored on the artistic side of it. But they're pretty athletic. I mean, some of the things you've seen male figure skaters do, I mean, it's amazing. The gymnast thing, those are outrageous athletes. All right. When we come back, Washington will be playing in London next year. I think I know who they might be playing. I'll have the answer for you when we return. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. This is the long version of God Save the Queen.
Yes, I needed the
It's
long
now God
intro.
Save the King.
Well,
Yeah. Washington's going back to Europe to play internationally next year. It was announced earlier today they will be one of the 3 London games. They won't play at Wembley. They'll play at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The game, more likely than not, will be in the month of October. That's when most of the London games have been over the years. Jacksonville's going to host one of the other 2. They're going to host a game at Wembley. And then we'll find out more as the NFL is, doing what they do. They're staying in front of the every other sport with announcements about their international schedule. And of course, between now and May, we'll get other things leaked out about the schedule because people like to talk about the schedule, not just people who do mock schedules. Everybody likes talking about the schedule. So Washington's going back to London for the second time, or to Europe, for the second time, and a third time in a regular season game. They played 2, one in London, one in Madrid last year. This one will be as a host because their previous 2 international games were as the road team. So that means that of the 9 home games that they have next year, one of them won't be in Landover. One of them will be in London, at Tottenham Hotspur in that game. The last time Washington was there, they tied Cincinnati 27-27. And yeah, it was painful because it very much felt like a loss. So some deductive reasoning on who the opponents will be. So you got to look at their home opponents because they're going to be the host. Dallas, New York, and Philly. Dallas is already in an international game, so cross them off the list. It's very rare in these international games that you have division matchups. So I'm going to cross off the Giants and Eagles in addition to the Cowboys from the list. The Rams are a team that is supposed to play in Landover next year. And I think they will, because I don't think they'll play Washington in London. They're already playing in an international game in week 1 in Australia against the 49ers. Both the Colts and the Falcons have recently played in international games last year. They played in Germany, in Munich. So I'm crossing the Colts and the Falcons off the list, 2 home opponents for Washington, because they played internationally last year. Now, Washington did too. I'm just giving the best odds on who the opponents will be. That leaves 3 scheduled home games against teams that aren't A, already scheduled in an international game, and B, haven't played an international game in the last 2 seasons. And those 3 teams are the defending champion Seahawks, the Houston Texans, and the Cincinnati Bengals, the team they played in London the last time they were there. So I think, and let's see if, the mock scheduler gets this right. I didn't give you the team. I kind of feel like Seattle won't be the team because they played on national TV last year in Landover. It might be. They might be the team, but it wouldn't surprise me if it comes from Houston or Cincinnati, one of those 2 teams in London. But Seattle would be the other option. My final 3 guesses, Seattle, Houston, Cincinnati. Don't forget that, Max, that on the day it got announced, that's who I predicted would be the opponents, one of those 3 teams. So I'm, narrowed it down from 9 possibilities to 3. Thank you, Max, actually. Max sent me a story, not you, Max, another Max, sent me a story that Les Carpenter wrote from the Washington Post. I don't know where Les will be headed now. A story that he titled, "One of the Most Fascinating Athletes I've Ever Covered." And it's his story on Alyssa Liu winning the gold. I had not read that. Thank you, Max, for sending it to me. I did read it quickly during the break. And he wrote, Les Carpenter did, "In the hour before Alyssa Liu would become the first American woman in nearly a quarter of a century to win an individual Olympic figure skating gold medal, she skipped around the warm-up area deep below the Milano ice skating arena taking selfies. The air around her Thursday night was filled with tension. lifelong dreams riding on the blades of skates. But in a sport built on nerves, Lou never seemed fazed. She is forever saying that medals don't matter, that Olympic free skates in packed arenas before millions watching on television are just a chance for her to show off ideas for skating programs, outlandish hairstyles, and new custom-made dresses. And so, as her opponents fretted, Lou grabbed her coach, Philip D. Guglielmo, and choreographer Massimo Scali, wrapped her arms around their necks, and snapped photos of the three of them. Then she went out and skated one of the best Olympic free skates of recent vintage. Her final free skate score was 150.20. That was by far and away the best. I had not seen Les's story, so thank you, Max, for sending that to me. A story that he was not titled. It was his tweet. I'm sorry. He tweeted out a link to his story and wrote, one of the most fascinating athletes I've ever covered. I didn't cover her. I was just a viewer, and I felt the same way watching the profile of her and then watching her skate. Will be interesting to kind of follow her. She is 20 now, and she's probably got a long career ahead of her. I see, and I saw a lot of this, and some of you just tweeted me during the break. I don't care about the politics of this at all. This is the diversion. Sports are a diversion. And if she's, extreme one way or the other, and several of you suggested she's super progressive, liberal, woke, etc., I don't care about that. In fact, I would say even more power to her, because it wasn't a part of anything that she represented. She represented the country, and she was performing as an artist and an athletic, in an athletic endeavor. I mean, the fact that we didn't hear anything about that, or I didn't, until some of you just tweeted me some of the stuff, I couldn't care less about that. I mean, I never let the art get in the way of the artist. That was something that, I read many years ago, and it's so true. I don't care about bands or singers that feel a certain way or might be extreme one way or the other. I'm not going to let it get in the way of enjoying the music or enjoying their art. I mean, if you do that, you're going to miss out on a lot. You're depriving yourself. It's what Doc Walker always said about Christmas music. Why would I only listen to Christmas music if I love it so much in December? Why would I deprive myself? Doc used to listen. He'd pull up in his car to the building. I remember one day walking out, and he rolls down his window, and it's like Bing Crosby's playing in his car. It's like the middle of July. I love him. We're done for the day. Back tomorrow. Chris is next.